But where Subud really began for me was I wrote some short stories about that trip to Indonesia. And on the basis of those, I was given a fellowship at Stanford University, which is a very good university in California. So I went to Stanford, and while I was there, it was all the ferment of hippies and anti-Vietnam demonstrations. And the other thing that was going on was a lot of psychotherapy, which had been developed in a clinical setting, was now being sort of pushed out and made available to the general community as a kind of recreational or personal development experience. And foremost amongst the people around San Francisco doing this kind of thing was a man called Hussein Chung, an American Chinese who practiced psychodrama, which is a very powerful form of psychotherapy, basically based on acting out your issues and problems. And Hussein was a genius at this. And his particular experience that he offered was called a psychodrama marathon, where you gathered with a group of 40 people around about 9 p.m. on a Friday night, and then you just did psychodrama solid for the next 40 hours. The experiences that people had, I've never seen anything like it before or since. It was heaven and it was hell. It was the most intense suffering and it was the most marvelous liberation. And after some of us had been doing this psychodrama for a while, we found out that Hussein was in some spiritual thing. So one day I went to him and I said, what's this spiritual thing you do? And he said, it's called Subud. And like a number of other people, as soon as I heard the word Subud, I knew that was it. Did not need to know anything else. That was it. Subud was it. So I started attending the local group, which was in a town called Los Altos. In those days, it was California. It was pretty free and easy. The men were doing latihan on one side of a curtain, and we probationers were sitting there on the other side. So naturally, we were deeply affected by the latihan. And after I'd been doing this for about 5 weeks, one night I had a spontaneous opening. It was like the champagne cork popping out of the bottle. And I just had, a most tremendous experience. I first of all felt I had a bowl of golden fluid in my solar plexus. And then this bowl broke. And all this golden fluid ran throughout my body, through the veins and the nerves. And in particular, I always remember how it went to the very tips of my fingers. And I could feel these tight little channels opening up and being filled with this golden fluid. So I went back to Hussein and I said, I think I've been opened. And he said, you better wait for the 3 months anyway. So I waited for the 3 months and I was opened. I returned to Australia.
How was that first official latihan compared with what you'd already experienced?
Not very memorable. No. In fact, I couldn't tell you anything about it. And a few years ago, we had a gathering for young people in Kalimantan called Basara. And Sebastian Flynn, who was in charge of Seeker at that time and was at that gathering, he designed a closing ceremony in which we were all assigned roles. And the role that he assigned to me was to be the scribe. And I realized that he encapsulated really what's my purpose in life, Like we're all supposed to have a purpose. And I thought maybe that's my purpose, or part of my purpose is to be a scribe for Subud. Because I have done this magazine and I've also written several books about Subud. So there I am, I have a role. Lately, my role, I'm now 80 years old, and lately my main interest in life, in a way, has become the preparation or the process of aging and preparing for death. And this began really, it's been around for a long time, it starts happening when you're quite young. But with me, it began very intensely last year. And this is when I really saw my focus is now. And there's a story about Bapak, which is in Abdullah Pope's book called Reminiscences of Bapak. And the story that Abdullah tells is that an elderly man came to Bapak and said, Bapak, I'm getting old, I'm losing all my faculties, it's terrible. And Bapak said, well, The problem with you is that all your life you've been driving a Toyota, and now God wants to give you a Cadillac, but you don't want to get out of the Toyota. And that's just the wonderful, homely way that Bapak had of encapsulating wisdom in very ordinary imagery. And I realized the profound truth of Bapak's statement. And the interesting thing about that statement is, all right, so I've lived in a Toyota all my life, so I know what the Toyota is like. But what is this Cadillac that's promised, you know? And I think for a long time, I didn't know, what's the Cadillac? What does that actually mean in how I live or how I behave or what I feel? And only now it's beginning to be, a vague shape is emerging from the fog. You know, a vague shape of a Cadillac, a vague shape of what it is we can begin to look forward to as something better than a Toyota. And it's coming to me bit by bit. And inevitably, the process of aging and preparation for death involves loss. We lose our hair, we lose our teeth, we lose our hearing, we lose our strength, we lose our sex appeal, we lose our friends, we lose our job, we lose our money. It goes on and on, the loss. So we have to somehow see what's beyond this process. And for me, it's things like slowing down, relaxing. I'm really much more relaxed than I used to be. And yeah, it's a growth of wisdom and becoming increasingly aware of the other side. It's like the membrane between the worlds grows thinner and thinner. And we can begin to see what's on the other side. And even though I now have to, I've given up doing certain things I used to do, nevertheless, I love life more and more. That's a curious paradox. The beauty and the wonder of life in this material world is just so, I just experience states of pure bliss and a kind of unspeakable happiness. And just about minor, tiny little things. A conversation with a person is just so blissful. I feel transported. And for me, that's really wonderful because my life, earlier life, has been a struggle. I inherited a lot of tendency to depression. There was a dark history in our family. My sister committed suicide. And so for me, there's been a real struggle about the negative side of life, struggling with depression, struggling with ideas of suicide. So it's quite wonderful to come out at the end feeling, oh yes, you know, life is so good. And I feel so happy. And Subud has been so good for me.